Okay, good morning, everybody, and you're very welcome to this morning's Google AdWords introductory class. My name is John Leach, and I'll be your trainer for this morning. So before we kick into the agenda and what we're going to cover, can I just do a quick sound check? If you've got access to the chat box, can you just type a yes in there if you can hear me clearly at the moment, and you can follow along with what we're saying and you can see my screen. Okay, there's one yes, two yes, a couple of yeses. Great. Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, so this morning you're obviously on the Google AdWords. Change that. Okay, so our Google AdWords sessions this morning. So our agenda is basically broken out as follows. We're on from 9:30 to 12:30 this morning, but we will take a break in the middle of it because 3 hours on Zoom is a long time for anybody. So our hope and expectation is that we get through the initial part of the course in the first session, and that's really to give you broad understanding of what are some of the things you should check and do before you even contemplate starting Google AdWords. And then some of the basic things in terms of keyword research and planning, your Google Accounts AdWords structure, and then creating your initial campaign and the initial campaign settings that you need to think about. We'll take a 15-minute break then in around about 11 o'clock, depending a little bit on questions, etc. And then we'll come back at 11:15 for the second part of the session, which really goes into the detail and the meat of creating the campaign. So ad groups, ads, and ad extensions. And then we'll also look at the metrics that you need to monitor and measure as you go along, and how to optimize your campaign, because honestly, it's sort of a constant piece of tweaking and optimization needs to be done every probably 2 weeks to your campaign. And then we'll have any questions and answers. And just to say that at any stage through the course of the morning, if you have a question, just type it in the chat immediately or type it in the QA. That way I will stop occasionally at the end of each topic, review what's in the chat, and we'll answer your questions then as we go along. So, feel free to raise your hand, put questions in there, and we'll try and make this as interactive as we possibly can. Okay. So a couple of other comments. We're recording the session this morning as well, just so that we can share it afterwards with you in case you missed anything. So you don't need to take completely copious notes, and you will get access to a recording of this morning's session as well. So you can concentrate on what we're doing rather than maybe concentrating too much on your notes. Okay. So let me do a quick introduction for myself just before we look for some feedback from you guys. So basically, my background is I've probably got a 30-year career in digital and technology and e-commerce generally. I started out as an IBM consultant and solution architect. I built my own an e-commerce business as the e-commerce director for Lenovo. We built their European e-commerce business. So I have lots of experience on both sides of the table in terms of having multiple agencies running large search budgets, etc. And now I work as an independent consultancy and agency working with a variety of clients, from e-commerce to traditional businesses. And we work with budgets from anywhere from 500 to 50,000 euros a month. So it is possible to be successful on small budgets. It's obviously a little bit more challenging. But part of what we'll talk about this morning is very much trying to figure out what the metrics, what the right things for your business are in terms to know whether you're going to be successful doing Google AdWords or not. Okay, so that's me. So just to get a feel for what stage everybody is at, so it helps me know where to pitch some of this content. So I'm going to kick off a poll. I will give you about 30 seconds to a minute to answer it. So there's only really 2 questions in it. Well, I'm going to launch that now. So on your screen, you should see basically 2 questions. So the first one is, what type of a business are you advertising for? So is it an e-commerce business with a large product catalog? Is it a services business where you're looking to generate leads, or a services business that you're looking to generate bookings? And then the second question is equally sort of simple enough in terms of, what level of experience do you have? Are you a complete beginner? Never done this before, so it's your first introduction to it. Do you have a basic understanding? So in other words, you have an ad count where you're doing some advertising at the moment and you want to, see if you're doing it right, or if you're actually doing pretty well and you're just looking for some tips to optimize. So we'll give everybody a 30 seconds or so to answer that. So still a few people yet to answer, getting there. Okay, we'll give you another just 5-10 seconds to see if we get everybody in. So we've got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll there. And okay, so on the course this morning, then we have one business. Obviously, it's an e-commerce business with a product catalog. So there are a couple of things that I will mention in terms of there are slightly different structures you might use with e-commerce, and then you also maybe want to use a combination of search and shopping in that environment. And then the rest are services businesses either looking to generate bookings or leads. And about almost 50-50, about 43% are complete beginners, and then the other 50% have a basic understanding. They have an Adwords account or doing some advertising. So no intermediate users on this morning. Okay, so we'll keep that in mind as we go through the content. And if you're looking for leads and moving it to bookings, that's probably reasonably similar as well. So there's just a couple of different things in the metrics that we need to consider, depending on the type of business. So I'll just keep that in mind as we go through the content. Okay, so let's kick into the first topic and the meat of what we want to talk about. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about where Google AdWords fit in the overall scheme of things, and things that you need to make sure you have in place before you really start to do Google AdWords. And the reason for that really is, if some of these things aren't in place, then you'll basically end up wasting your budget and not having the success that you need. So I think it's important before you even start to consider Google AdWords, because they work really effectively for many businesses. And for some businesses, they don't. So it's important to understand some of those characteristics and requirements and things that will give you the best chance of success. So let's talk about strategy versus tactics. So the first thing I generally say to people is that Google AdWords is a tactic. It's a set of actions that you can take that have a particular chance of success in particular circumstances, and they should really fit into a broader strategy, because very rarely for any business does one tactic make an overall strategy. And when I'm thinking about a strategy for digital advertising for a company, there are a variety of things that you need to consider. So they include your business objectives, and by this I mean, obviously, if you're a stable business and you're just looking to maintain the level of business that you're attaining at the moment, then that's one sort of objective. If you're looking to grow aggressively, then you would take a slightly different approach and a much more aggressive approach to your Google ads. So you need to know which camp you fit in. The next one really is business economics. So there is a cost, obviously, to every click, every visitor you get to your website that you get through Google Ads. And that's what we commonly refer to as cost per click. So you'll very often see a metric called CPC, which is cost per click, talked about when people talk about Google Ads. The thing that you have to remember, and we look at this in a little bit more detail, is you have an average order value, or you have an average value that every lead or every booking is worth to you. So the first thing that you really, before we even contemplate whether we can be successful in Google Ads or not, is to understand, well, how much am I willing to pay to acquire each new customer or to acquire each new order. Because that cost per acquisition, or CPA as the acronym says, is something you can measure very accurately in Google Ads. And that's one of the powerful things of Google Ads, in that for your advertising in this space, you know exactly how much every euro that you spent has generated for you in terms of business. So you can measure your rate of return much more accurately than you can for many other channels. And that's the real attraction for it. But you need to understand how much you're willing to pay and what actually success looks like in that space. Then the other thing you need to understand is obviously, personas and target audience. So by this, I mean, what solution, what problem are you solving for your customer? Because that obviously determines the type of keywords that you select to advertise on and the type of ad copy that you write. Because if your ad copy doesn't resonate with the customer you're trying to attract, well then two things will happen. Either they won't click on your ad, and therefore you'll have a very low click-through rate, and therefore eventually Google won't show your ads. Or secondly, they will click on your ad and be very disappointed when they land on your website and not convert. So that's probably even worse than that you spent money and you've not converted to a new customer. And then there are, depending on where you are in your cycle, there are a whole variety of different tactics, and I will share some of those in the next chart. And it's a question of picking the right tactic to address the right audience at the right time. And Google AdWords isn't always the right answer, but for many businesses, obviously it is. So when you think about digital advertising, this is sort of one way of looking at the landscape. So the powerful thing about Google Ads is that you are addressing people who have an intent. They're searching for something. So hopefully they're looking for the thing that you're selling. Whether that's everything from a physiotherapist to a plumber, if they're looking for a widget, for whatever, they've gone on their browser, either on their mobile phone, and increasingly it is on their mobile phone, and typed in a search term into Google. They've looked for something. So the real powerful thing about paid search is very much that the customer is in market looking for something at this time. And so for marketeers and advertisers, that's a great signal to us that this is a person that we want to talk to, and we want to get a message in front of. Of course, the other thing you shouldn't forget about is Bing. Bing being Microsoft's search engine, probably still represents about 15 to 20% of the search volume, has all of the sort of tools and capabilities of Google, and there is less competition out on Google or on Bing, because obviously Google is the big gorilla in the room. So when you are doing paid search, it's for some customers, and certainly anybody that's talking to an older demographic, it's certainly worth thinking about having some of your budget put into Bing as another sort of approach to the overall strategy. If you're thinking about if we don't have intent, if we can't find intent, then another way of finding is thinking about demographics and who people are. And that's where Facebook, for example, has some very powerful tools in terms of interest, demographic targeting, because obviously Facebook has collected an awful lot of information on all of us at this stage in terms of what we're interested in, what sort of sites we visit, some of our demographic information. And they also have a really powerful lookalike engine. So in other words, if we have people who visit our website and have purchased on our website, then we have the ability to find, or Facebook has the ability to go out and look for people who look like those people who successfully purchased or visited us. And the logic there is that, if somebody looks like a customer of yours already, well, then the chances are that, they might become in turn a customer of yours. So if you're looking at demographics or that type of information, and that's then maybe Facebook, Instagram, or some of the social platforms might be part of your strategy. What they do, so in other words, if we're looking for particular job titles or marketing to particular roles like that, well then obviously LinkedIn is a key platform, although cost per clicks and advertising costs on LinkedIn can be quite expensive. But again, they have many different ways of helping you target those sort of people. if your marketing strategy needs to be based around, where people are, because you're a physical presence or an attraction or something, and you want to advertise to people who are in a particular place, well, then there are a variety of ways of doing geo-targeting and geo-fence sort of advertising as well. So that might be part of your strategy. If you're looking at a conversation, if there's a topic, if there's something being talked about, well, then very often Twitter is the place to find that particular audience. And with good use of hashtags and those types of things, you can drop into that conversation, you can advertise into that conversation. So therefore Twitter might be part of your strategy. And then if you're looking at people, really powerful part, and this is true actually of paid search as well, very often the reality is, the first touch, the first time you put your message as a business in front of a customer, they're not going to convert. They're not going to immediately say, yes, this is what I want. They're going to buy or they're going to book. So that's where we can have retargeting and remarketing strategies. And by these, I mean, is that, where somebody has come to your website based on maybe coming from a paid search ad, they go away without converting. Because you can pixel or drop some cookies in this case, you can then go find those people as they surf the net generally and provide advertising to them on other websites. And this is retargeting, remarketing. And even for search campaigns, we would generally recommend, once you're spending a reasonable budget, about 10% of it should go back into remarketing, because it will bring some of those people who you successfully brought through paid search in the first case to your website, but didn't convert. You should be able to bring a percentage of those back to your website and convert, and therefore improve the overall performance. So the point here is really, you need to have to think about which tactic suits your business best. And very often one tactic doesn't make a strategy. It's some combination of all of these different tactics are required to have something that's really successful. So once you're thinking about, this is probably true for all of these tactics, you absolutely have to identify your market and your customers and what problems you solve for them. And you have to think about where they look for solutions. So if people search on Google for a solution, like plumbers near me, good example, then yes, Google Ads makes sense. If you've got something that people don't really know about and therefore don't search for, then it's going to be much more difficult to make AdWords work for you, or if there's very low search volume for your words or terms. So when we look at keyword research, a really important part of that is using Keyword Planner, that we'll look at later, to see what is the search volume for the sort of terms that you think you're going to advertise on. Because if there's no search volume, well then guess what? There's going to be no traffic to you. So it's going to be much more difficult to be successful. If there's lots of search volume, then you need to think about what the intent behind that is. I would also recommend researching your competition. And there's lots of tools out there, obviously some paid, some free, which will help you understand what sort of keywords your competitors rank for, even if they're advertising on particular keywords, and what their ad copy looks like. And, that's always good information to have, because you can then make a choice of whether you copy what your competition is doing or maybe do something completely different because you want to create a differentiated message. You have to determine your message and your calls to action. So, in some cases that's easy. It's shop now, it's book online, it's wherever. But very often, people write ads and don't have a call to action in them. And that's generally speaking a miss. And when we look at ad copies, it's sometimes even for services business where you're trying to generate leads, maybe you have to, go take 2 or 3 steps at it. So maybe the first thing is to download some sort of resource where you get their email, therefore you can market them afterwards, and then you convert them via email, and you're using paid search to find that initial lead, or you're going straight for the conversion on paid search. So strategies, include both types of approaches. And then really you have to, we will spend some time talking about your campaign goals and KPIs and make sure that they line up with your business strategy and what the business economics look like. And these things are true for e-commerce sites as well as services businesses. because in an e-commerce catalog, you will have certain product categories that will have different profit margins and different revenue implications, and therefore you don't want to be spending the same amount of money advertising products that, sorry, I think we've got the wrong view here, so let me do, if people can see all of my screen or just the full screen. Let me just check here. 1 second. Okay. Let me just do this. I'm going to put this back in screen share mode, folks. And then I'm going to swap. Okay, can everybody see just the slide then showing up the full screen? Is that okay for everybody now? Is that better? Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so we'll. So this is, as I say, this is true for e-commerce sites as well as services business, because in your catalog there are probably categories of product that don't have the same either revenue or margin benefits for you. So therefore you want to be advertising at lower rates on those, and there are other products that are highly profitable. You want to make sure that you're spending money on those correctly. Equally for services businesses, you need to make sure that the overall what you're spending on those leads are within what the business can afford and what the business understands it needs to do. Okay, so next thing I would suggest before you even attempt to do AdWords is just audit your overall digital presence. So typically Google AdWords are going to take traffic to your website. So what's it like? Is it credible? Are you happy with the, I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily designed perfect and all the rest of it, but is it professional? Is it up to date? And is it mobile optimized? Because basically Google puts a high degree of store on the fact that most of the traffic, probably 60%, maybe more of your traffic will come from mobile devices. Even mobile searches, the volume of search has moved to mobile, the majority of it. So if your website doesn't work well on a mobile phone, and by that I mean it's responsive, so in other words, you don't have to pinch and zoom and scroll to actually see the website, and it's relatively fast. And by fast, I mean having about a 3-second load time. Any of those things will impact the performance of your Google, no matter how well you write your Google ads and all the rest of it. If the website or the landing page that you're bringing it to, is not set up correctly, well, then your Google campaign is likely not to succeed in the way that you want it to. The next thing is obviously, just as a general advice, whatever properties you're using, it doesn't mean that you have to use Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn for your business, but if they're, depending on your business, if they're important, then you have them. But also Google My Business. So for most companies, this is free. It also adds to, some of your SEO equity. And if good SEO helps, improve the performance of your ads as well. Doesn't always work the other way around, but make sure you've claimed your Google My Business profile and you're optimizing that, which is relatively straightforward each month. But really, really important is the next one, having analytics installed. You really can't be successful with Google Ads if you're not tracking your analytics, if you're not tracking your conversions and feeding that information back into Google so it knows what to optimize for, and equally, what the results are. And in most cases with smaller clients or people starting off, their tracking is the thing that doesn't get set up correctly. And that really sets them up for failure as they go through Google Ads. So most important thing on this slide really is to say, make sure that your site is optimized for mobile, performs well on mobile, and secondly, making sure that you have analytics and conversion tracking installed correctly. We don't spend a huge amount of that in this course this morning because it's a little bit more technical and depends on the type of site and what your site is developed in. But if you're unsure of that, it's something that you really must check as you go along. And then, do you have your KPIs set? So the most important thing to understand in this case is your overall conversion rate. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we look at how to think about the campaign KPIs. But as a general rule of thumb, 3% conversion rate is pretty average. It's sort of half decent, but pretty average. So for every 100 clicks that you pay for on Google, only 3 will turn into a sale. So, the simple logic then you got to remember is that if I'm paying, 50 cents for a click, I'm going to need 30 clicks to get a sale. So therefore the cost of that sale is going to be 15 euros. And if you're selling something that's 500 euros of value, well, 15 euros the cost per acquisition is pretty decent. If you're selling something that's 20 euros, well, then a 15 euro cost per acquisition is not so good. So you need to keep that in mind as we go along. Okay. Okay, so to create your Google account is pretty straightforward. So about half the attendees have a Google account already, so this is not entirely relevant. So it's pretty simple in terms of just creating the account. It's basically go to ads.google.com/home. You can click on Start Now, and then basically you get a screen that's on the right hand side. You do need a Google associated email address. So obviously you can associate your existing business address with Google. You don't have to create a Gmail account, for example, although sometimes people do that, and it's certainly an okay thing to do. But you can associate your existing email with a Google account, and therefore you can then use that email address for all of your Google properties. The other thing I would suggest is switching to expert mode, because this is when you try to create a Google Ads account. Initially, it generally creates what we call as an express account, which doesn't give you all of it. It's Google's effort to make it simpler, which is fair enough. But then you pass all control over what's happening in your account really to Google. So I would generally recommend that you switch to expert mode. And that means that you can see all of the things that we're going to talk about this morning in this course. You can use Ads Express to set up an account, and Google will do most of the work for you, but generally you have very mixed results with that. And Google will try and spend your money to figure out how to get results for you, fair enough, but it rarely has great results in my experience. So that's just creating your Google account. So the next thing you need to consider is having a value for every conversion. So I mentioned earlier that you need to have conversion tracking. So that's pretty simple if you're an e-commerce site, because the value of every conversion is the revenue generated from that sale. But you should also do it for leads if you're a services business. So you need to sit down and think about what each new customer is worth to you. So if you're a plumber, and your average job is 750 euros that you get through your website, and if you convert 10% of all the leads that you get through your website, so that means you need 10 leads to get one customer. One customer is worth 750 euros, therefore each lead is worth 75 euros to you as a cost per, as a value for that conversion. And then you got to think about, okay, if it's worth 75 euros, how much am I going to pay to get that 75 euros worth of value? So it'll have to be less than that. So it's just a way of setting your KPIs and targets that they make sense for your business. But I would also go further than that and think about, okay, what are inquiries worth to you, or what to sign up to your newsletter, for example, if you do something like that. And again, they might be worth significantly less. So for example, signups to newsletters, I would generally create a value that says, okay, if I've got 1,000 subscribers on my newsletter list and my email campaigns, generate 10,000 euros per annum, well, then I know every email address in the list is roughly worth 10 euros. So I can afford to spend some of that 10 euros to acquire a new email subscriber, because I know over time that email subscriber will generate 10 euros for me as a business. So look at all of the conversions that are on your website and assign some value to them in terms of, because that allows us to calculate the real value of the tracking later, or the conversion value. I mentioned conversion tracking earlier. Just to add a couple of things to that, there is the ability to add parameters to each URL, and that will actually allow you to be really accurate in your tracking. But this is probably a slightly more advanced technique. So for most people who are starting off on basic, you can just do the normal AdWord linking, which I'll show you in the account. You don't need to worry too much about UTM tracking. But as you get more sophisticated in what you're doing, you want to track each URL much more accurately as you go along. And then the other one is phone calls, because many businesses forget the value of phone calls in their advertising, and you can generate phone calls very effectively from Google Ads. So you also need to make sure that phone call tracking is turned on in your AdWords account, because that's a valuable conversion. Very often, particularly for services businesses, phone calls are worth even more than visits to your website. So make sure that we can track phone calls. There are call-only ad types within Google paid search, and there's call extensions, which means we can add a phone number to any ad that we add in Google Ads, and then people will see that number when the ad comes up when they click on it. The only challenge with that is people don't always read, so they think they search for one thing, they see a phone number and they ring. So in driving phone calls through Google Ads, you will get a volume of irrelevant phone calls. Unfortunately, that's just an occupational hazard, and it's just about managing that and making sure that the AdWords and the keywords that you're searching on aren't just generating junk calls for you, but it's something to keep in mind of. Okay, so I know I'm spending quite a bit of time just talking about metrics and what you need to consider before you start, but I think it is important, and I'm going to really just talk briefly about the top 3 on this, because these are business metrics, because very often we get completely engrossed in ad impressions, clicks, click-through rate, all of those sort of elements, which are important to your marketing team, your marketeers, or your advertisers, if you like. But for you as a business, there's generally 3 things that you're worried about. One is cost per lead. So that's very simply your advertising cost divided by the number of leads generated. So that can be forms submitted on your website, quotes requested, whatever way you collect leads on your website. And then I would always say cost per lead is not the end of the story. You also need to understand the conversion rate of those leads to customers, because then you know the true value of the campaign. So Google AdWords is not going to know that, because it doesn't know how well you convert those leads. All it will see is how many leads were generated. So you need to think about the value of those leads to your business. Cost per acquisition is basically is probably more, is how we would describe the same thing for an e-commerce site. So it's basically cost of advertising generated by revenue generated. So whether it's orders or volume or whatever, this is your cost per acquisition. You can do it either on revenue or orders. This is the same thing for leads, just for e-commerce. And then another way of looking at this then is what we call return on ad spend. And so this is the revenue generated as a percentage of advertising spend, and you can have Google optimize for that. Again, probably a little bit easier if on an e-commerce site, because it's basically it's the reverse of the cost per acquisition equation. So this one says I've spent 100 euros on advertising, I've generated 500 euros in revenue. So I have a 500% return on ad spend, or a 5-to-1 rate of return. So again, for your business, you need to think about, depending on your margin, maybe 5-to-1 is great. If you've got a high margin business, if you've got a low margin business, 5-to-1 is not so good. So you need to be pushing it to 8 or 9 or 10-to-1, which is part of the challenge. The other metrics here are metrics from the campaign. So the conversion rate. So what percentage of your visitors complete the required action on your website? So if that's not at least 3%, you're probably going to struggle, just because it means you need more and more clicks to get a single conversion. And then cost per click is the thing that you're trying to optimize in your campaigns to reduce that. But there's no point having a low cost per click and having a poor conversion rate, because one cancels out the other. Click-through rate is the percentage of people who see your ad and click on it. And that's a really good measure of how well your ad resonates with your audience. Impressions is the number of times your ad is served to your audience. So in other words, what you'll see in Google Ads is, maybe there's 1,000 times that your ad was shown, and then you got 30 clicks, which means you got, of those 1,000 ads, 30 people then clicked on your website, which is a 3% click-through rate. And then clicks are the number of times that people that click on your ad. And in paid search, you only get charged when somebody clicks on your ad. And that's when Google gets paid. But more of that later. So when you're thinking about, when I talked about different tactics, fitting into different campaigns or different strategies, different tactics have different characteristics. So in this example, I'm just working through an example of trying to work out for a client, what the possible return from a Google AdWords campaign would be. So campaign 1 is more typically what you would see in a paid search campaign, and campaign 2 is more typically, either a display or indeed social media campaign in some respects. I'm not going to say whether these are good or bad because every client is different, but the characteristics are slightly different. So for campaign 1, so for a paid search ad, you would generally see less impressions than you would on a Facebook or display campaign. But in a paid search campaign, if it's working correctly, then you see a much higher click-through rate. In this case, on the left-hand side in column campaign 1, I'm suggesting a 5% click-through rate, which would be pretty good. Minimum, it needs to be at least 3%. Whereas if you're using display, you might only see, 0.5% of click-through. It also, it may be higher, but I'm just using these examples to differentiate between the two types of campaigns. So that means your paid search campaign 1 generates 100 clicks. Your campaign 2 generates 500 clicks. So you might be thinking, hey, campaign 2 is better. But not until you look at the rest of the data. So, your paid search ad might be costing you a lot more per click. In this case, 150, which would be, a relatively high cost per click. Or on the case of campaign 2, 30 cents per click, which is somewhat lower. So now the cost of your traffic in both cases is actually the same. 150 euros versus 150 euros. But then you look at conversion rate. So again, you would expect, because people clicking on paid search ads have a high intent, they're in market looking for something, they generally speaking have a much higher conversion rate than somebody who's just scrolling through, social media feed. They've sort of seen your ad, they're mildly interested, but they're not necessarily in market looking for your product. Or they've seen a display ad on the Irish Times site and maybe they've clicked on it by accident, or maybe they're just mildly interested. So that means, the paid search traffic we would expect to convert at a much higher rate compared to either social or display. So we've got a 3% conversion rate on 100 clicks. That means we get 3 orders or 3 leads in paid search, but we might only get 1 order or 1 lead in the display/social campaign. Your average order value, in this case, 275 euros. That means the paid search ad generates 825 euros for 3 orders. The other campaign only generates 275. So that basically tells us our cost per acquisition for paid search in this case is 50 euros. That's the cost of each new order, because that's 3 orders at 150 euros for the total. Our expense to revenue ratio is 18%. So of each new order, 18% of that is going out in advertising costs, and our return on ad spend is 550%. So we spent €1, we got 550 back. And you can see the similar metrics on the campaign 2. It's 150 euros per acquisition, so it's actually much more expensive. It's half the revenue, and it's only 1.8 times the return on ad spend. So the point here really is, it's not so much about the number of clicks, or indeed the number of impressions. It's, to me, what's important is how it ends up into, adding to the bottom line for the business. So that's why conversion rate, cost per acquisition, average order value, those are the metrics are really, really important for you to understand and make sure you have a clear view of what you're expecting before you go into your ads account. Now, it doesn't mean that all of these things, there is a limit to the number of searches that you will get, really good performing searches. So of course, when you exhausted that budget, you probably have to go into display or social or something else. Some target markets work much better with social than paid search. So you have to, this is why I say you have to understand your overall strategy before you go any further. Okay, 2 or 3 things on how to win with Google. And this is important just from an approach to the thing. So Google will show ads for 2 reasons. One, they get clicked on, and therefore Google gets paid. Very simple. And the second thing is that those ads are relevant to the customer, because that's what keeps Google as the #1 search engine. So it's important to remember that Google became #1 as a search engine because when people searched on Google, they got relevant results. So there's no point in you advertising on keywords just to get traffic that aren't relevant to your business, because Google will understand that, will give you a low quality score, will charge you more and penalize you, and won't show your ads. So you've got to make sure that when you're writing ad copy and you're selecting keywords, that the keyword you're searching on matches your business, the ad copy you write matches the keyword that you're bidding on, and the landing page experience that the customer lands on, again, fits with that ad copy, fits with that keyword. So you got to be doing the right thing for the customer in order to be successful on Google Ads. And that's what keeps everybody, it's a win-win, a win for Google and a win for you, and hopefully a win for the customer. So you can only win by delivering the right ads to the right audience. So you got to target the right keywords. You got to think about time. You got to think about location. And by that, I mean, we can target ads to physical locations. So County Louth, North Dublin, Republic of Ireland, UK, we can target ads by location very reasonably accurately. And there really isn't any shortcuts on not delivering the right ads to the right audience if you want to be successful. And don't worry about having smaller volumes, because smaller volumes can be highly targeted and therefore successful. Sometimes we get really obsessed with getting large volumes of traffic, and that's not really the best source of success. Okay, I'm just going to pause there for a second. Any questions or anything that any questions? I see one about, can we get Google Ads to direct to a landing page? Yes, Audrey, you can. And in fact, very often it's important to create a specific landing page for a specific ad campaign, because that way you can absolutely make sure that the keywords that you're targeting, the ad copy you're writing, and the message on the landing page aligns very, very accurately together. Because you have to remember, our websites are written to talk to the entire market, the entire audience, to our entire product offering, and that may not be the best place. Bringing traffic just to your homepage isn't always the best way to get success. You have to think about creating landing pages for some of these things. Okay, that's all the questions are there for the moment. So let's talk about ad rank and quality score for a couple of minutes, because these are important concepts to understand as you embark on your Google Ads journey. So the thing that people obsess about sometimes is, how do I get my ad to appear first? It's the same with search engine optimization. I want to be #1 in Google, because we all know that the top 3, top 5 placements get pretty much 75–80% of the traffic. So how Google determines which ads it shows, because remember, this is an auction, so you could have multiple people bidding on the same keyword. So it's a thing called ad rank, and that's calculated through a couple of different there are a couple of different parameters, a couple of different things that fit into that Google ad rank. So the first thing is bid amount. So obviously, if you're prepared to pay more for a click, then that will improve your ad rank, but it's not the only way. Google will not take it as the only thing that it'll put into its calculation. But it's one of the things in terms of your bid amount. And we'll talk about different bidding strategies as we talk about the campaign later. Ad quality and quality score, and this is where relevance is really, really important. So ad quality and quality score, the biggest measure or the one metric that impacts that is click-through rate. So if Google sees an ad that has a 40% click-through rate, which is very possible, or a 60% click-through rate, that tells Google very clearly that this ad is resonating very strongly with all of the people Google is putting in front of. And therefore, it must be a good quality ad. And that's very much part of the equation. So that's why I come back to saying, making sure your ad copy, your keyword, and your landing page are all well aligned. And then the other thing is, Google will also look at context of search. So it'll look at device, time of day, some of the search terms that people are using. It'll feed that into its algorithm. And also ad extensions. So ad extensions improves your click-through rate, generally speaking, because you're giving people more options to click on. And if you give them more options, generally you'll get more, you will get a higher click-through rate, maybe 10, 15% more clicks. And again, by improving your click-through rate, you're improving your quality score. So the thing to remember here is your bidding strategy, what you're prepared to bid on a keyword is important. The most important thing is your ad quality, and that's measured by click-through rate. And then make sure that you have all of the possible ad extensions set up, and we'll show you those when we set up the campaign. Okay. So basically, quality score, as I mentioned, it's a combination of your ad format, your click-through rate, your landing page experience, and how relevant Google thinks your ads and your keywords are to the terms that people actually enter. Because there's a difference in the keywords that you target, because Google has to match them to the things that somebody actually types in. And Google will do things like substitution of synonyms, etc. So it knows, Google is all the time trying to figure out the intent of the person typing in the search and matching that to the keywords and content that you're providing. So it's not a one-to-one, it's a bit more sophisticated these days than that. And even with voice search now, you get a lot of natural language long tail. You know, Google tell me where my local plumber is, you know, so Google will match that back to plumber or plumber near me as a keyword, for example. So it's getting a little bit more complicated as we go along. Why quality score is important? So this is just a metric from an old WordStream white paper that says that if you've got a quality score of 10 for a keyword, it probably discounts your cost by 50%. If you've got a quality score of 1, which is really poor, you may pay 4 times the amount to get that click, which has a really important impact on the financial performance of your campaign. Okay, so let's pause there. So I see a question on ad extensions. So the question is, can you, what's the impact of ad extensions? So we'll probably show ad extensions when we look at the campaign a little later. So ad extensions are when you see, you know, when you see an ad on Google, you can also see a combination of things like site links. So this is where under the ad you will see maybe a link to your contact page, your product page, your lead services page, etc. So they're called site links. There's call extensions. So you can, on the ad, sometimes you will see a phone number. There's structured snippets, which are things like just comments, they're just, you know, small comments about your product offering, you know, vegan friendly, fat free, if you're advertising food, for example. So you can have some of those sort of elements. So really what ad extensions do is they put an awful lot more content on the ad or on the ads page. And therefore people have more opportunities when they read the ad, they have more things that they can click on. So generally the impact of making sure that you have all of those extensions defined that you can means that you get about 10 to 15% better click-through rate. So that's the real impact of ad extensions. And that has 2 business results for you. One, you get more clicks, which is good. Secondly, you have a higher click-through rate, which actually improves your quality score, which in turn actually probably discounts the price you're paying for your clicks in the first place. So it's a bit of a double whammy. So that's the ad extension impact. Okay, So let's talk about the actual. Let's get into the meat of the account structure and setting up campaigns. Any other questions before we move on to this? Okay. Okay. So if you're, this is sort of the typical, this is the account structure for your AdWords account. So at the top level, it's your account, and that's associated with a unique email address, which needs to be a Google associated email address. So typically you either create a Gmail account or a Gmail email to use, or you associate your existing business email with a Google account and you use your existing email. So it's got a unique email and password to access the account, and billing is done at the account level. So basically Google will roll up all different campaigns that you're running, and it'll send you one bill or charge your credit card every month for every month, or a particular threshold, which is typically 300 or 400 euros for the advertising that you're spending. And obviously no campaigns will run unless there's a payment method set up in the account, which is typically a credit card. Larger advertisers with a good track record can get payment with an invoice and other billing methods, but for most smaller accounts, it's credit card on the account. Now, the important thing really to think about is there are campaigns and there are ad groups. So typically people will have maybe a couple of different campaigns, and campaigns really should be thought of as having a particular business objective. So you're trying to drive conversions or leads, you're trying to sell particular product categories, you might have different objectives. So there are things that we can define and control at a campaign level, and there's things that you control at an ad group level. So at a campaign level, the first thing that you can control is the type of campaign you're running. So is it a paid search campaign? Is it a display campaign? Is it a shopping campaign? Is it a YouTube video campaign? So obviously, you know, that's the most important thing that the campaign defines. So when I say objective, it's really about the business objective that you're trying to achieve. You control the overall budget at a campaign level. So for example, if I have two different product lines in my business, you know, one is motorbikes and one is scooters, then I can control the amount of budget I put into scooters or into motorbikes by having different campaigns for the different product sets. So that's the next thing we control at the campaign level. The third thing is bidding strategy. That's how we bid on accounts. That is controlled at the campaign level, and we'll explain more about that in a later set of slides. And then location. You can, if you're in different countries, we would generally suggest a different account structure by country. But for argument's sake, you could have, a campaign that's, running in Louth, Meath and Monaghan. You could have a campaign that's running in Dublin. You could have a campaign that's running, Galway, Mayo, or wherever. So you can set different locations on a campaign level as well, depending on if that's a business, something of interest to the business. And there are some additional settings as well, which we'll talk about. But the main ones are your budget, the type of campaign, your bidding strategy, and location. And that determines if you set something up as a campaign or the next level down, which is an ad group. So you can have, if you have multiple, you can have multiple different ad groups. And by an ad group, then what we control here is the ads and the keywords and negative keywords. And we'll talk a bit more about negative keywords later. So by this, within a campaign, if you've got, say, 3 different products, so if you're selling, charcoal barbecues, whatever, you group basically your keywords around a single theme, because that's going to determine what ads are shown, and those ads have to be related to those keywords. So we can have 3 or 4 different ads, 3 or 4 different groups of keywords, one group of keywords associated with one ad, and we would put those into a single ad group. From that point of view, and then also you can have different ad extensions by ad group, and then you can also adjust your bids, your max bids, or make bid adjustments by ad group. So by that I mean I could have a total budget for the campaign. Let's say it's 20 euros a day. I can have a maximum CPC bid on a keyword or in an ad group of say 50 cents, but on this other keyword we can actually have a higher maximum bid within that campaign. So you can adjust those sort of things within an ad group within a campaign. So again, starting off, you need to think a little bit about the structure, and you need to divide out your ad campaigns and ad groups into the right sort of logical structure, one that makes sense for you as a business. And by making sense, I mean it's where your product set sits, where your services sit, and where you're going to spend and invest money in. So very often we might have a campaign for your brand terms. So we would bid in your brand terms, that would be in one campaign. We would have a category campaign. So if you're an e-commerce site, maybe you have a campaign for necklaces, for bracelets, for earrings, if you're a jeweler, for example. And then within those different campaigns, you might have different types of necklaces, pendants, gold, silver, wherever. So you'd have 3 separate ad groups for 3 specific types of necklaces within a necklace campaign that's within your account. So that's how you build up the structure. So question here, do you need a separate campaign for each location we trade internationally? The short answer to that question is no. You don't need a separate campaign for each location, but I would generally recommend that you do, because that gives you visibility on which locations are performing differently. Different competitors will appear in your campaign structure in different locations, so you get to sort of see that and control it. You'll also maybe bid differently depending on the market. So I think certainly for international locations, I would possibly even go as far as saying you should have a separate account per country, because then that also, whether you're paying in sterling, euros, dollars, or wherever you have those complications to consider as well. So while you can run a global campaign in an account, you can have multiple different locations within an account. I would definitely recommend at a minimum that different campaign per location, but I would also consider a different account per international country as a structure to have to consider as well. Okay. Any other questions on structure? Okay, so let's talk about keywords, because this is really the key first step in any sort of, when somebody says, I want to run a Google AdWords campaign, the first thing you got to look at is keyword, search volume, and intent. So the first thing to understand is, top right hand corner, this is a version of, the marketing funnel. Some people may be familiar with that. Some people may not. So if you think of your general market, you have people need to be aware of your services. They need to be aware that they have an issue. So that's sort of the market potential out there. So is there a problem out there that you're actually solving for? Then you have to get people to have an interest in your offering in terms of solving that problem. And then eventually they, having found you, having looked at your website, having done some sort of education or engagement with them, then they become a prospect, and then onwards onto being a customer. So the thing that you have to think about here is a thing called search intent. So if we use an example of somebody who sells charcoal, for barbecues, Just an example I sometimes use on these training sessions. So if somebody types in the word charcoal, it's quite difficult to understand what their exact intent is. The flip side of it is there's going to be lots of searches. There's probably a bigger volume for charcoal. But as we'll see, they might be looking for charcoal for barbecue. They might be looking for a charcoal pencil, the color. They might be looking for a specific restaurant called the Charcoal Grill. So we don't really know their intent. So we sort of go from looking at keywords, and the first job is, okay, getting a set of keywords that have a volume of search, so they have some search intent out there in your location. But then we have to think about, okay, how relevant are they to the business, and do they represent people who are in market for what I'm actually selling at the moment? So as you come down this funnel, the keywords tend to get longer. So there's a very different intent for somebody who searches in, where can I buy charcoal today, versus somebody who types in, charcoal, or where can I buy charcoal online, for example. So if somebody types in that, there's a pretty good chance that they're actually looking to purchase charcoal online. So that's a really good search for me to actually go bid on. Whereas I might get clicks on charcoal and they're looking for a charcoal pencil, and I'm selling charcoal for barbecue. That's obviously not going to connect. So the challenge is, as you get more specific with the keywords, there's a lower search volume, and very often that's the work involved in making your campaign sort of work. So as you look at your campaign running, Google will show you what search terms people are typing in, and I'll show you an example of that in a moment. So therefore you can see which keywords are driving conversions and what value they have for you, and therefore you can then go add those search terms as keywords to your campaign. But we'll explain the difference of those in a chart or two. Okay, so the process that you would generally go through is start by listing down 10 or 20 search terms that you think people would use to search for your business or product. We'll do an example now here in Google Keyword Planner. Then you can basically, Google will give you some suggestions as to what to search for. You can use this then in the forecasting tool to generate initial estimate, and then you begin to group keywords into similar or relevant groups. So we'll do this live in a second, but before we do that, just to do one more piece of explanation on keywords. Right? So the keyword we're trying to do is, so the example I'm going to use here is charcoal. Somebody selling, charcoal for barbecues, basically. So we'll start off looking at possible words that we might use in Google, and we're going to think about search intent. Then the other thing for your Google ad campaign, there are 3 different match types. By that I mean we can put a search word into Google and tell Google that only bid on this exact search word. Don't bid on any variations of it, etc. Only bid on this exact phrase. So for example, we could take barbecue wood chips, and if we put it in square brackets, which you can see in the negative keyword sort of column on this page, that means it's an exact match. So if somebody types in barbecue wood chips exactly as that says, then Google will show your ad. If they type in barbecue wood, it's not going to show your ad. If it types in wood chips, it's not going to show your ad. It's only going to, show your ad based on the exact match to the keyword. That's very good for controlling your cost, but it also limits your search volume. So the next version up is what we call phrase match. And then basically what that means is based on, if we put in, say, charcoal as an exact match, well, then it would only show your ad when somebody types in charcoal and nothing else. If we put in charcoal like it is on the phrase match column on the chart here in quotes, it means that if somebody uses the word charcoal and something else, then Google may show your ad. So search terms like charcoal barbecue Ireland, charcoal barbecue, BBQ charcoal, all of those terms will trigger your ad because it's a phrase matched to the keyword that you used. Now, there used to be another match type, which was broad, which basically gave you some more variations. That's effectively being phased out. So really now the two key ones are phrase match and exact match. Now, the next thing to remember is, and this is actually as important as the keyword you bid on, is basically negative keywords. So every successful Google Ads account probably has more negative keywords in it than they have keywords that they're actually targeting. Now, why is that important? So for example, I'm trying to advertise in charcoal, right? So apparently charcoal is also used in bleach. So if somebody's looking for charcoal bleach, it's not what I'm selling. I don't want my ad to appear. So I add charcoal bleach as a negative keyword to my account. That means somebody types in that, Google knows it's negative, shouldn't show my ad. There's also a restaurant in Galway in Eyre Square called the Charcoal Grill. So again, I'm an online seller of charcoal. If somebody's looking for the Charcoal Grill to make a booking in Eyre Square, I don't want to show that person their ad because they're not looking for what I'm selling. So again, we add Charcoal Grill Eyre Square, Charcoal Grill Galway, Charcoal Grill phone number as negative keywords. So we're telling Google, don't show my ads when people type in these terms. And similarly to keywords, you can have exact or broad matches, etc. Now, the problem is, if I put in, you might be tempted to put in charcoal grill as a phrase match for negatives, and yes, that will get rid of the charcoal grill Eyre Square term, but maybe it would also get rid of other terms, other searches that might be valuable to me. So you just need to think about how you set up those negative keywords in terms of the match type. And then the third column on this page are the search terms. So search terms are the actual searches that trigger your ads. They're the actual searches that people type in into Google. And what Google is all the time doing is trying to match the keywords that you've typed in on the left-hand side with the search terms that that people actually search. So a really important part of optimizing your campaign as you go along is to review the search terms that trigger your ad and decide which of those terms look like they're relevant to my business, and I want to continue using them, or I might add them as an actual search term or an actual keyword, or those that I need to add as negatives. So on the right hand side, charcoal barbecue Ireland, charcoal barbecue, that's the one you need to think about here is charcoal barbecue. Is that somebody looking for charcoal or actually looking for a barbecue in which they can burn charcoal? And you might decide to exclude charcoal barbecue because that's not what you're selling. You're actually only selling the charcoal. And this is sort of some of the art to trying to get this correct. You got to have to test some of these sort of things in terms of how it works. But you have to be reviewing the actual terms that trigger your ads to know whether your targeting is working or not, and go back and adjust accordingly. Okay, I'm going to take a break from the charts and just go into Google AdWords for a second and have a look at that. Or any questions before I do that? So question here is, can you add competitors' name and service here as a phrase match? And yes, you can. And what I would say to that is actually we would very often though put a separate campaign in as a competitor campaign and target your competitors in a separate campaign. Why would you do that? Because sometimes, so there's a couple of reasons. For some clients that competitor targeting actually works pretty well. For some clients it doesn't work at all. Depends how strong the brand loyalty is to those brands, and how easy it is to switch somebody if they're looking for a different brand to yours. how easy it is to switch them. So you want to control the amount of money that you're spending on it. The other thing is to remember is that you'll have a low quality score on your competitors' brand terms, because your website, won't be talking about your competitor. So Google knows it's not as relevant to what the person was searching for. So the performance will be impacted of the campaign for that reason. And the third thing to consider, sometimes you just don't want to poke the bear. You can see if your competitors are bidding on your terms, if you've got a brand campaign, and sometimes people respond when you start bidding on their terms, they start bidding on yours. So you can sort of get yourself into more pain by doing that. But it's certainly worth considering. But it's not the first place I'd start. I would sort of focus on your terms, your brand terms, your category terms, your service terms. If that's all working well and you want to try and expand, then maybe test the competitor's campaign in parallel with that. That's the approach I would take to advertising on your competitor's terms. Okay, any other questions before we? Okay, so let me stop this for a second. Let's. Okay. Okay, so can everybody see the Google ad screen in the webinar? Even if Google's a bit slow this morning. Okay, so this is basically just a test account that I've set up here. And when you log into your test account, this is one of the places that you can go. So let's go back just one step here. So this is what your home page within your Google account will look like. So this left-hand nav gives you a chance to come back to all of the campaigns. In this case, we don't have any campaigns in here. It's just one that we set up for the training call this morning. The thing to just be aware of here, obviously this is the date range. So, we need to just keep an eye if you're looking at campaign performance or anything else, that you're looking at the right date range, etc. So first step that we're going to look at is we're going to go to tools and settings. So these are all the different individual tools that are within your account. So we're actually going to go and have a look at Keyword Planner as the first step. So you're going to go over into Keyword Planner. And I'm going to start just to do some basic research for my charcoal campaign. So we'll talk about search volume and forecast in a second. So the first job we want to do is we actually want to discover new keywords, right? So you can do two things here. You can start with keywords, or you can start with a website. So you can, put in your website URL and tell Google, go have a look at my website. You go figure out what keywords you think is going to be relevant to my site. And again, sometimes that can be useful. It also tells you what Google thinks your site is relevant for, which is sort of an important piece of information anyway. But sometimes it doesn't give you much result. So typically here we can start with up to 10 keywords. So I would always start with asking, you as the business owner, say, okay, what do you think people will use to search for your product? And most people are able to come up with, at least 5 to 10 keywords. I think it's probably slightly more than 10 here. So, my charcoal provider, the thing about charcoal, barbecue wood, lump wood is another sort of variation of what they're doing. Restaurant grade was important to them. Smoking wood chunks. So what we're going to do is just going to take probably too many here, but we'll take the first 10, put them into Google Planner. So it's taken these 10 words and we're going to ask Google, go off and, okay, tell me what the search volumes are. Now, so what we get here out of this now is here's the prediction for Google in terms of the search volumes for these 10 terms that we've put in. So the first thing you've noticed is I've limited it to Ireland. So again, if you're advertising to the UK, you're going to do the US, you can change the location here. So if I change this for argument's sake and say United Kingdom, country, I'll just add that, and then say that, we'll see that the volume will go up significantly, naturally enough. So, now we have 22,000 searches for charcoal instead of the number that we had previously, right? The other interesting thing that this gives us is a sort of view over the course of the year as to where the volume of searches are for these terms. So interestingly enough, April, May, and June is the peak of people searching for charcoal, and then it begins to decline all the way down to a low in November, December, January, February. No great surprise. It's a pretty seasonal product from that point of view, but it also gives you a sense of, if you happen to be starting your campaign here, well then, it gives you the insight at least, well, hey, this volume is likely to increase at different times of the year. So now what have we got? So we can, these are the search volumes for these terms. So, but this basically tells me is there's 22,000, actually I'm going to go back to Ireland here. Those numbers probably just big. Right, so we have 1,600 searches for charcoal in Ireland per month. So this is average monthly searches. So if I'm going to do, I'm just going to sort this by, okay, now, so if we look at the top ones here, so charcoal grill is 1,900 searches per month. Charcoal is 1,600, barbecue charcoal is 1,600. Then we see some smaller terms. So Weber charcoal barbecue 390, kettle barbecue 320. So these are the terms that, on a broad match term basis will trigger ads for these search terms up here, right? So obviously in here we found some interesting ones. So charcoal grill, we got to think about. That's maybe something that may not be entirely relevant for us. It's close, but it's not relevant. So maybe we need to think about what we do with that, because it's a big search volume. So if we leave charcoal grill in there, chances are our ads are going to be shown a significant amount of times for that. I suspect there are several charcoal grill restaurants around. That's actually driving the volume here. And the interesting thing, it's less seasonal. We don't have much of a change in the last 3 months, whereas obviously charcoal and barbecue charcoal have bigger changes. So it's looking at this, you'd say, okay, barbecue charcoal is probably a really important term, and it's more specific than charcoal. So we probably add that as a search term in our ad campaign. Then we could look at Weber charcoal barbecue. Now, that's probably looking for the brand and actually buying an actual barbecue. So it's probably not one we'd want to use. Kettle barbecue, again, probably looking for the actual barbecue piece, not the charcoal for it. Briquettes, hey, given that turf has been in the news the last while, this might be an interesting one, but yeah, probably not relevant to this campaign. So what you can see here is, as we go down the list, what the volume of every month is, or predicted volume of searches for any of these terms. And these are the terms that we provided. So this is what Google, so Google has basically expanded our list of 10. We scroll down to the bottom here. It's expanded out to 4,186 keywords. Now, you're never going, you're not necessarily going to use that. So very often what we would do here is basically download this list to a spreadsheet to go sort through them and pick what we think the best ones are. So we're looking for two things. One is is sort of something with decent search volumes, but also something that you know, fits within our sort of cost per click. Now, you got to be careful what Google predicts. Generally speaking, when I'm doing a forecast here, where I would actually increase these costs by about 60%, because what Google is assuming here is that you've got a good quality score. There's not, you know, that you're writing a highly relevant ad and all that sort of stuff, which particularly for somebody starting out, that's generally not the case. So the costs tend to be a little bit higher. So what we do here is we just we can play around with refinement here, but from my point of view, I would normally just download these and then download as a CSV file, and then we'll sort through what we might use in the campaign. I'm not going to go through the full sort of campaign forecasting process, because that's probably about a half an hour in itself, and it's probably only that relevant for slightly more intermediate type users. But the point here is that, you know, having started off with just, you know, 5 to 10 keywords, put into Keyword Planner, you've now got a list of 4,000 keywords that you need to sit down, tease through and decide which ones are relevant, you know, for my customers that I think are going to work best for me. And don't just be swayed by the search volume. You got to think about search volume plus search intent, because they're the ones that are going to work best. So that's there are other tools out there, you know, to help you with keyword research, but actually the Keyword Planner in Google itself probably does a pretty decent job in certainly getting you started for what you want to get to. And the best keywords are a combination of impressions, a high click-through rate for you, and you'll only know that when you begin to test, because that's the other thing you say to people. You have to test this campaign maybe for 1 to 3 months, and then ultimately, if they're driving conversions for you. If they're not driving conversions, it's a bad keyword. Doesn't matter how many search volume or what sort of search volume is there for them. Okay, so let's any questions on keyword research? I mean, that's pretty quick, but it's pretty straightforward, really. Start with your seed set of 5 to 10 keywords, put it into Keyword Planner, see what Google suggests for you, download them into a spreadsheet, sort through them, you know, settle on a couple of groups of keywords that you can logically add into different ad groups and that look like have good purchase intent for your product. That's probably the best advice. Okay, so let's slightly behind where we would hope to be, but let's look at the initial stuff about creating your campaign before we take a break. We might run just a couple of minutes over 11 o'clock. But let's look at just a couple of the campaign elements first. So let me go back here. Okay, can everybody see my screen okay? Okay, good. Okay, so when you go to create your campaign, and we look at this in the tool in a second, there are a couple. These are the campaign settings that you need to consider first. So when you select to create a new campaign, Google sets a number of defaults, and some of which can work, some of which I would generally make sure that you think about changing. So the first one is networks. So by default, Google will not just have display your ads on Google Search Network, but they also on partner networks. And they also show your ads on the display network, which are small little text ads that appear on other websites. Now, if you've sort of maxed out your volume and you're not spending your budget and you want to spend more and all the rest of it, you can add these back in. But to start with, I generally recommend that you remove both partners on display. And the reason for that is because generally they get a higher cost per conversion than just on the Google search network. So my first approach to getting a successful ad campaign running for somebody is, let's make sure that we start tight and small. You get your campaigns to at least break even as quickly as you can, and it takes a little bit of time to optimize to that point sometimes. And then once you have your campaigns breaking even, based on your required cost per acquisition or required return on ad spend, then you can sort of begin to optimize and drive better performance. So that's why I would suggest just taking out partners on display from the campaign settings in the beginning. Locations, make sure that you're, if you're selling in Ireland, you're targeting Ireland. If you're a service business or local business, and it's Louth, Meath, Fingal, you can target as North Dublin. Make sure you get your location matched to what makes sense for your audience. Budget, you can set, per day. So that can be anything, as low as €1 to whatever. The thing to remember on budget, basically Google will average out your budget spend over the course of a month. So if you set a daily budget of €5 a day, it may spend up to €10 on some days, but that means on other days it's going to spend less than €5 to bring your average back to €5 over the course of the day. So it can spend up to double the daily budget, so don't panic if you see that. And then the bidding strategies, we're going to talk about bidding strategies in a moment. The other thing to remember on location, there are two types of location settings. One is people who are in your location or have shown an interest in your location. So generally speaking, I would always make sure that we set that to only people in your location, because really that's what you're targeting. Unless you're a different business where people who are interested in County Louth but aren't in County Louth are a target that you want to hit. Okay. So we're just going to talk about bidding strategies and what are available. So the two things I would say about this is these are what Google calls smart bidding strategies, and you're probably best advised to wait a little while before you go to a smart bidding strategy and start initially with what we call enhanced CPC, and that's where you can actually set a maximum cost per click based on your calculated cost per click multiplied conversion rate. Is that sort of aligned with your cost per lead before you move into these? But you want to move to these smart bidding strategies over time. So target CPA is when you have a clear view in terms of how much each order or each lead you want to pay for, or the maximum you want to pay for each lead, if you like. Now, if you set that target CPA too high and Google can't achieve that, then it just won't show your ads, so you get optimized out. So you have to be careful. Target ROAS is just similar to that, but it's where your target CPA is where you're less concerned about the total budget you want to spend, but you want a cost per individual acquisition. Target ROAS says I want to achieve a particular return on my budget, and sort of less concerned on the individual acquisition costs. Maximized clicks is one that we sort of use very often just to get data into the account. So allow Google to show my ads as often as it can in order to maximize the number of clicks that I get, because if I get clicks, at least then I'll begin to see how well my website performs and how it converts, etc. So maximized clicks is a good sort of first one when you don't know what your conversion rate is like, and therefore what your sort of target CPA can be. Maximizing conversions, again, good strategy to use. One that we use often is where, look, I've got a budget of 300, 500, 700 euros per month. I have my conversion tracking is all working, and I have at least had 15 to 20 conversions in my account in the last 30 days. That's the important part. So if it's got good conversion information, that you've got a set of conversions in your account, then you can go to max conversions. If you go to max conversions without having conversion information, you can see some unpredictable results until Google gets enough conversions to be able to optimize for that. So you have to be a little bit careful with max conversions, but it is a good bidding strategy to go with generally. And then target impression share. Generally only use that on your brand campaigns. So where you're bidding on your brand terms, where you want to be visible 100% of the time that somebody searches for your brand, you would like to be visible. This is a good strategy to use. I don't really believe in using search as a brand awareness tactic. I think there are more affordable ways of doing it. So I generally don't use it outside of that sort of specific example. So to summarize, you basically have, maximize conversions, but the one that I probably, the two that you probably start with are maybe maximize clicks, because you want to get volume into your account before moving to maximize conversions or a target CPA or target ROAS bidding strategy. Or the other alternative is to use, say, okay, I'm only going to pay, max, €1 a click, because I know I can't afford to pay more than €30 for every conversion. I know I have a 3% conversion rate, so I'm going to start at that point. So that's why we generally sort of use maximize clicks or enhanced CPC as our starting strategies, but we want to move away from those over time when there's enough data in the account to move to a smart bidding strategy. So the top 5 are relevant. Start with something that you can control, and then maybe move it to some of the more smart bidding ones. Because the smart biddings, I used to avoid them, but they now work, pretty well. So it's good to get there. And then the other thing you can do in the account is set an alert to make sure something doesn't go mad. So if your cost per click goes beyond X or your cost per CPA goes, you can set up an alert in the account. So you get an email to say, by the way, your campaigns, just passed this threshold. So you get a warning before, because if you go away for 2 or 3 weeks and suddenly you found you've spent all your budget and you've got nothing back for it in 2 weeks, it's not a good result. So the smart bidding, the reason we don't go all out on the smart bidding in early stage in the campaigns is, it can result in a lot of fluctuations as the Google algorithm tries to make sense of your website and what works for you. So if your budget is tight, you need to tread a little bit carefully and just stay away from the smart, just go about it in an organized way to get there. So the next couple of charts are really just summarizing what we've talked through. Enhanced CPC, we said that's manual bidding. You're setting the maximum. It gives you maximum control, but also means Google can't play around with too much to maybe get better performance for you. Maximize clicks. Google automatically adjusts your bids to get the maximum number of clicks for your budget. It's good for fixed budget. I'm assuming you're going to have conversion tracking in place, so the second line here doesn't apply. But if you don't have enough history, if you don't have enough conversions in your account, then this is not a bad place to start. So you need 15 plus conversions a month at least to get maximized conversions to work well. Okay, this is just a target ROAS calculation. Ultimately, you want to get this type of thing because now you're saying I'm spending €100, I'm getting €700 back. My target ROAS is 700%. Google, you go adjust the bids to make that happen. And that's really good. But the thing to remember is you have to be realistic. So there's no point if you run your campaigns, and you're achieving, 300% ROAS, and you just basically go in and tell Google, well, I want to get 700% ROAS. What will typically happen is Google will try, maybe fail, and then it'll just say, okay, I can't achieve this, and they'll just stop showing your ads, and it'll only show your ad once a month because it knows it'll get that 700% ROAS maybe on that one. But now you end up spending €1 and you get €7 back, and it's not really that worthwhile. So 300 to 400% ROAS is certainly achievable in most cases. If your margins don't allow, needs to be higher than that, then you just have to be that little bit careful. But target ROAS is a good one to get to over time. Okay, let me just go back in before we break and just show you that in the Google tool itself. So let me escape out of here. So we're back in your Google account. Can everybody see the Google Ads screen in my Okay, the question here, sorry, before I go on, in keyword ideas, how do you change average monthly search data for keywords to trend view rather than numbers? You can do, there's a couple of different ways for doing that. And it's probably not, you probably don't want to look at trends data for an individual keyword, but there is a separate Google tool for trends, which is called Google Trends. So if you want to see over time for a location, so for example, you can use this tool, which is called Google Trends. So you can just Google Google Trends. And then if what you do here is if we put in charcoal, for example, as an individual keyword and a search term, then we can see, you know, what the trend over the last sort of 12 months were, or we can actually extend that back over the last 5 years. For example, so you can see that there was a big spike in charcoal searches in, you know, April, May, June 2020, and we've seen lots of spikes around that time, some of it related to lockdown and everything else. So you can sort of see, you know, what your particular terms, but you can also, you know, search for a topic which aggregates, you know, some more different sort of searches, etc. And so you can use the Google Trends tool to investigate particular topics and particular areas, and you can also compare it. You can also do this, compare for different brands, you know, so you can see if people are searching for a certain brand or a certain product and compare different ones using the Trends tools. So that's probably the best one. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Amy, but that's another one to consider when you're looking for trends. Okay, let me go back to AdWords. No, that's the wrong one. I'll give Google a second to load itself. Oh yeah, okay. So maybe that's a good time to take a break and I'll go get Google Ads to load again. Okay, so I suggest we do, folks, just while I get the Google Ads account to load up, let's take a 15-minute break. So we're just coming up to 10 past 11. So if everybody comes back, well, maybe we're a couple of minutes behind, so maybe let's change that to 10 minutes. So everybody's back online for 20 past 11, then we'll restart with going through the campaign settings directly in the tool and progress from there. So if you want to take a 10-minute break, go get a coffee, stretch the legs, and we start back in 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, hopefully everybody has a chance to stretch their legs, get some caffeine. We're pretty much ready to restart. So just ping in the chat if everybody's back. Just say you're back so that we can see who's back and we're ready to go. Okay, there's some back. Okay, good. One of the challenges of doing these things on Zoom is just making sure we keep some feedback going back and forth. But thank you for all the questions so far. Hopefully we've got to answer most or all of those for you as gone along. And second half of the session, same sort of thing. Let's stay with just entering any questions in the Q&A box at any point as we go along, and I will stop occasionally and as we move through the topics to answer anything that comes up. Okay, so we're just going to walk through setting up a new campaign in Google AdWords. So you should be able to see the Google Ads test account screen. Can everybody just confirm, or one or two people say that you can see that in screen share mode at the moment? Okay, so when you go in, when you're in your new Google Ads account, if you like, and you want to create a new campaign, so we click on the new campaign button. Okay, and then the first thing that it's going to ask you for is your objectives. So whether it's sales, leads, website traffic, you know, you can read all of these as you go along. So most people on the training this morning are looking for leads. So we're going to pick the leads objective, and then it's giving you a couple of options in terms of campaign types that you might want to use. So obviously we're talking about search this morning, but there are these other campaign types which I mentioned at the very beginning. You know, from Google, there's other platforms in these spaces as well, but we've made the decision that with search that we want to do. So we're going to click on search, and then we're going to say, okay, select ways you'd like to reach your goal. So I'm assuming at the moment that for everybody's for the purposes of this, that we're a combination of website visits and phone calls. So we're just going to claim website here just because it requires you to do that. So this, and then I'm going to click. We stick with visits for the moment because we can always add phone calls as part of it. In terms of creating a conversion tracking event, you can either do this in two ways within the account. One is you can obviously install the conversion tracking tag from Google Ads Manager. So what you do, if we do that here, it'll basically create the piece, and then it gives us three different options to actually install it. So it's sort of outside the scope of the call this morning, but to say that you either need to create this conversion event as part of the campaign setup and then have your webmaster install it, or the other alternative, if you have Google Ads or Google Analytics installed, you can go back into the tools and conversions, and I'll show you this later, and you can actually import that from Google Analytics, which in many cases is possibly slightly easier for you to do. So give it a name. So test campaign for training. We'll go ahead and continue. Now, if you've got lots of different campaigns, and over time you may need to think a little better about your naming conventions here. You may want to put start times, you may want to put business objective, so that when you go back and look at your different campaigns over time, that there's some logic to what you're seeing. But for the purpose of this morning, we're just going to call it a test campaign. Okay, so the first thing it tells us here is your average daily budget. So in this case, we're just going to go with 10 euros a day. That's roughly 300 euros a month. And then it's asking you for the bidding strategy. So what do you want to focus on? So Google will generally force you into conversions, and it will ask you to possibly set a target cost per action. So I'm going to do this a moment because I'm going to go and change these settings later. So I'm going to say, we're going to focus on conversions. I want a target CPA of 30 euros. Go into more settings, ad rotation, optimize best performing ads. We would generally always leave that on. Okay, so this is sort of what I will do here. We'll either set a target CPA or a maximize conversions bidding strategy. And as I mentioned earlier, that isn't always the best place for a new campaign to start out with, but we'll go back and adjust that in a moment. So this is when we talked about campaign settings. So the search network, we have, so it will appear on the search network. That's where the ads are going to appear. But I would generally turn off the search partners and only turn them on if you're not spending all of your budget and your campaigns are working reasonably well. And equally the display network, because what happens there is you get a lot of poor quality ads out on poor quality sites, poor click-through rates, and just generally doesn't necessarily add to what you want to be doing. So I would turn off the display network and I would turn off the search partners as a first step and revisit that later when your campaign is up and running. So locations, so important to look at location options here and say, so this is at the default is people in or regularly in or have shown an interest in your target location. So that's the default. So definitely, you know, you can think about changing that to, you know, people searching. So that's actually changed what we've been there previously. So I'm actually going to leave that setting as it is here. That's the other thing that Google loves to do is change some of these things over time. So you have to stay awake on what you want. Language English, sometimes it'll offer you Polish here as almost a second language in Ireland, but English is fine. And then we're going to ignore audience segments at the moment. Typically, for optimization purposes, you might add these later so you can see which types of audiences that Google have are performing better. But for now, we're going to ignore that for now. Okay, so what we're doing here is, so Google's already going to have a look at back up here. So it's looking at my website. So it's going to be a bit of a mismatch here. We're going to go search for, I was going to do the charcoal piece because we're obviously looking at this website. But for the purpose of just showing the process that we're going to go through, let's get rid of that for a second, and then we're going to enter keywords directly in here. So I'm going to delete all of these keywords. Simply take my list of what I'm going to do here is just paste in these. So I'm actually going to remove charcoal because we thought that was probably a lot of searches, not great search goal or search volume. So over here is sort of giving me some estimates here in terms of, you know, 40 clicks a day, average CPC 25, cost per day, daily budget. So somebody barbecue lumpwood, barbecue charcoal, smoking wood, wood chunks, maybe too broad an intent for what we're doing here. Barbecue wood chips for smoking, charcoal for barbecue, barbecue briquettes, and wood chip for smoking, right? So we're going to stay a reasonably well-defined group of keywords. So I'm going to go with those. Time we're going to get 40 clicks a day, which is probably okay from my starting point. So now we're going to have, now it's going to ask us to write an ad. So the anatomy of a Google ad, let me just see if we got charts on that. So before we go into the campaign, we talk about some first principles on ads. So at this point, we've sort of set up the basic campaign. We're now into the next step, which is actually creating the first ad that goes with the campaign and these keywords. So let's just change gears and go back to the slides for a couple of minutes. Let me put this into mode. And now, can everybody see my charts in full screen mode, or are they okay and visible? Okay. So when we're writing ads, there are a couple of things that we need to think about. So the first thing you got to remember is first principles. So you're always talking to people. So very simply, is this something I would click on? Does it sound appealing? Does the ad make sense, or is it just a bunch of keywords jammed together? Does the landing page answer the promise set in the ad copy? So as I was saying, you need to group your keywords around a common theme, keep it reasonably tight and small, and then write ads corresponding to the keyword theme. Now, there used to be two types of ads you could write, which were responsive text ads, which is what we're going to look at in a moment. And the previous ones were expanded text ads. So they're actually going away this year. So I'm not going to talk about those because there's no point in creating something new in that space, because Google are not going to allow them from later on this year. Okay, so ad copy. So the things to remember is, leverage keywords where possible. So like if we're talking about selling barbecue charcoal, then we should mention barbecue charcoal in the ad copy, because that matches the searcher's intent. You should capitalize the first letters of each of the words. That's generally recognized as best practice. You need to make sure when we're writing an ad, there will be a URL, a final URL or destination URL in the ad. And that should land people to the most specific page possible that's relevant to that ad. And by that, I mean, like if you're an e-commerce, shop, selling, shoes, like women's shoes, men's shoes, etc. Don't write an ad that lands the traffic on your homepage, lands it on the woman's. If you're writing an ad around women's shoes and that ad group, land the traffic on the women's shoes category within your shop, for example. The measure of success to me for any ad is sort of click-through rate. Ultimately, it's conversions, but the first job of work is to get a minimum of 2% click-through rate. I mean, that's not great, but at least it's functional. But your ads really should get 3, 4, 5, 6, 7% click-through rates. Brand ads should get 30, 40% click-through rates. And that has a big influence on your quality score. And then basically the advice used to be run 1 to 3 ads. Really now it's you can build. The beauty of responsive search ads is Google is taking all of the headlines and descriptions that you give them, and it's working out which combinations are best. So it's actually an improvement in Google ads. So you probably just only need to write 1 responsive ad per ad group. And maybe as things move on, you can maybe add a second one for testing purposes. But really now all you need is 1 responsive ad per ad group. So I'm going to skip over the extended ads, because the text ads, because they're going away. And then this is what a responsive search ad, what you need to write. So Google gives you the option of providing it 12 headlines. So, for this case, we have the Great Charcoal Company, which is the brand name, and you can pin that so it always appears. Not a bad idea. Then you sort of headlines, all your barbecue needs, premium sustainable charcoals. This is a more general set of headlines for the. This is a barbecue company. Actually, this ad was written for. So it's a mixture of different, not just charcoal elements. So the thing to remember is you got 30 characters here, and you've got 90 characters down here. In terms of the amount of space that you have to write. So that's really the difficult thing, is actually making your message fit the number of characters that you have. So what we suggest when you're writing ads, include a call to action. Don't use click here. That's generally against Google policy anyway. You don't need it. I mean, it will be highlighted. People will click on the ad. And then some of the ones that work in terms of call to action. So you get, buy, shop, try, learn, depending on what sort of a business you are. But, you sort of have to ask for the business. So order online now, those types of headlines and descriptions are all important in your overall ad. couple of things on punctuation. Don't add loads of exclamation marks and all the rest of it. That will a violation of Google policy. So Google won't approve your ad. So keep it clean. You can use an exclamation mark, you can use a question mark, but try and use it in normal written sense. You're not trying to highlight something by having 4 or 5 exclamation marks at the end. That doesn't work. So this is, we talked about ad extensions earlier in the mix. So this is what I'm talking about, what we have with ad extensions. So site links are links to internal pages. So on the left-hand side, this is what the typical desktop version of your ad looks, slightly different on mobile. But this is for cybersecurity training. So this is your ad headline, headlines up the top. This is the display URL, which can be different to the actual URL that the traffic lands on. These are the structured snippets, in terms of things that you're talking about, to improve user awareness with cybersecurity, sign up for free trial, etc. And these are the site links. So this is a link to the solutions page in the website, and this is linked to a security awareness page within the website. So they're site links. So the most important thing is to add, and you can add site links at a campaign or an account level. If you add them at an account level, it means they automatically get added to every campaign that you run. So you might have a contact us page, a book now page, a product or services page. You can add those extensions at an account level, and they would be typically added to all of your different campaigns automatically. You can also add call extensions, so that gives you a phone number in the ad. So if you're interested in getting phone calls, particularly for service type businesses, then you'd always add a call extension, and Google will track that as a different conversion for you as well. You can, if you have multiple locations, like a retail chain, you've got 4 or 5 locations. If you link your Google My Business profile, then you can pull those locations into your campaign, and Google will use that to show the right location to the right person, particularly if they're searching on mobile. And you can also add price extensions. So you can have a series of 3 boxes here for 3 different groups with offer prices and that sort of stuff. So they're typically the main ad extensions that you should add to your campaign. I mean, price is obviously only more relevant for e-com type sites, less so for businesses that are looking for services or bookings. And the main, the 2 things about it is, as I said earlier, increases click-through rate, and particularly location and call extensions kind of a big improving impact on mobile search, which increasingly 50%, 60%, maybe even more of the search volume comes from mobile these days. So having good performance on mobile is really important. Now, thing to remember is all of these extensions don't always show. Google decides on a case-by-case basis, and it might show them one time, not show them the next. So the thing you need to make sure is that your important text is actually in the ad copy, in your headlines and in your description. That's the key thing to making sure you're getting the key message across all of the time. So let's go back to Google Ads and see what that looks like. So in this case, we're going to just change this to the charcoal. It's going to have to be HTTPS. And great charcoal company. It'll probably complain because it won't find that. Website, but not to worry. Okay. So now we say, okay, the display path. So we got barbecue. So we're advertising barbecue charcoal here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in barbecue charcoal into the display URL. If I can spell that rightly. Okay. So basically what that is, you can see this display piece here at the top of the ad. Now this doesn't have to be a physical URL that exists. So what you generally do is, again, you use it to communicate messages that are relevant to the keywords that we're searching for, and you're just, again, reinforcing for the user, the person who searched for something, the intent that, yes, I'm looking for barbecue charcoal. Subliminally, you're looking at, I'm going to land on a URL that has barbecue and charcoal in it, even if that's not the case. It gives me a better confidence to actually go and actually click on that ad to bring it through. And then basically we start to add our headlines. So we can see, the first one I'm going to put in is my brand name. Okay. So the one thing you can do on some of these here is you can also pin some of these. So what Google's going to do is it's going to take from all of these headlines and descriptions I give it, it's going to show different variations of it to everybody until it figures out a combination that works. But if I've got a really important headline that I don't want to miss, I can select to pin it. So I can say, pin it in position 1. So that means every ad will always show my brand name, in the first position on the ad, which is fine. So you can either do that, or you can say, okay, I only, make sure that it's always there, not necessarily in the first or second or third position. Google, you can decide where to put it. But very often we would put the brand into the first position, so that we should continue to. And then we just add here, let's say premium charcoal. So you're basically just writing a series of headlines. Best range of charcoal products. So that's going to be so that's now 31 that's 31 instead of 30 characters. So we just either take the best range of charcoal product, which doesn't sound as well, but that's what we need to do to make it fit. You could say Marabou charcoal, which is a brand name that a company might sell. And we keep adding base, and the more headlines you give Google, the more it has to work with. We might, maybe sustainable charcoal is something that's important. So you're trying to just write stuff that's going to encourage people to click on your ad. So again, if cheap charcoal, price is important in this space. In this case, they're more interested in premium charcoal, but we can obviously add in cheap if you want. So that's basically, as I said, I've just added a few here. And then as you see, the ad begins to build up here. So it's going to use different versions of these headlines to give you this top headline here. And then we're going to go into the description. So let's say something like, this can be a little bit broader. So we can go with something like best charcoal, supplying the best charcoal. Let's do this. So we write a description line that okay, supplying the best charcoal and wood chips. And then include the call to action here, order online. So in this case, we've used 76 out of the 90 available characters. So again, you need to write, at least 2, if not 4 of these descriptions. And as you go through this, Google will give you a view on how good your ad is, and you can continue to tweak this. So it's sort of saying we're not including enough sort of keywords. So you go back and have a look at adding in some more, let's say smoking wood. So you'd say smoking wood for barbecue. Go back and look at your keywords again. What else have I got in the keyword mix? We've got barbecue briquette, so I added that in here now. and etc. And you keep just adjusting this. You know, ideally you want to get this at least to average to good. You don't really want to have an ad stem to poor, because that's sort of a view of what Google thinks what your ad is like. So we can go add another description here, which basically again is talking to the overall company. So we're still for another description. So you can basically keep adding here. So up to 4 descriptions and up to 15 different headlines. And at that point, you're going to have an ad that's going to be done. You're going to hit done on it, because we could spend another while here trying to improve that ad. And then we go on to next. Okay, so now you just got to create your site link extension. So this is pretty straightforward. You put in, you know, the text, so what's going to appear. So for example, it could be contact us. Then you got to add, you know, a description, 2 description text for that. So I mean, you can call this, you know, customer service contacts. And then you give it a final URL, and it's going to fail because this is a fictitious site that we're using at the moment. And you sort of work these out in terms of you add 4 different or 6 different, 4 to 6 different individual pages in your website that you want to include in your site link extensions, and that will all help improve your click-through rates. The next one, I'd probably do, depending on your business, but particularly if you're a service business looking for bookings, you can then go add a phone number. So this is as simple as, you know, picking Ireland and adding in whatever the phone number needs to be. So it can be a landline, can be a mobile, etc. And in this case, you know, Google will track calls from ads as a conversion action. So you'll be able to see how many times people clicked on call me, you know, the phone extension in your ad, and that will be counted as an extension. So I'm just going to go click next here. I'm probably going to get some errors because we haven't finished. I'm actually going to put in just a number here just to do that. I'll probably complain that we haven't cleaned up the site links. Yeah, okay, so it's looking for me to add up, you know, the extensions. That's all right. And then I click publish campaign. Okay. So now in my group, there's a question here. I'm going to put in contact number. It's this one. I don't know how to get that number. Okay, so not sure, Audrey, if I understand the question correctly. If you're putting a contact number on the landing page, can this be an 1800 number, and how do you get that number? So there's 2 things. You can add a phone number to a landing page. It can be any number that you have, so you get that number yourself, you know, in terms of number for your business, mobile number, etc. You can add a conversion event in Google Analytics, so that when somebody clicks on that number, particularly in mobile, a little bit more difficult on desktop, obviously, but they bring up your website, your landing page on a mobile phone, they click on that phone number, you can track that as a conversion, and you can feed that back to Google Ads to say people landed on my landing page, they clicked on the phone number 10 times, and that conversion event is calls from website. It's set up within Google Analytics. In this case, what we've just been talking about is when they actually see your ad, there's a phone number directly in the ad. It can be different to what's on the landing page, or it can be one. Sometimes people set up a specific phone number just for ads because they want to just see the difference between the 2. And they will get the option to click on that on their mobile phone particularly, and it'll call it from the ad, and that's calls from ads. So the only challenge sometimes with call from ads is, for example, we've had examples in the past of a dentist surgery which are advertising, and people who were searching for their own dentist, and the ad for this other dentist appeared alongside it, and they didn't look at what they were clicking on. They were clicking on the ad ringing the other dentist. And then when they got the other dentist, they thought they were, you end up saying, no, this is not XYZ, and they have to go back and ring their own dentist. So people have a bad habit of not reading what they click on sometimes. And that's the only thing you need to be aware of when you're driving phone calls via Google Ads, is that sometimes if it's not targeted correctly, you do get some junk calls. It's a sort of a occupational hazard, but as long as it's only 5-10% of the calls are not useful, then it's still worth it. If you're more than that, well, then you have a judgment call to make. So there's two ways of getting people to phone. One, from the ad, you put the phone number in the call extension that I just showed you there a second ago. The other is you can have a phone number on the landing page, and you can set up analytics tracking to track how many people click on that over time, and feed that back to AdWords as a conversion. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, you can always I'll unmute you towards the end, and we can talk through what anything we want to do there. Okay, so going back to our ads account, if I go back here now, and I'm just going to go back up a level, I'm going to go back up to all campaigns. So we have in our account, so I go into under campaign, and we have campaigns. So we now have one campaign in our account when Google refreshes its screen. The joys of Google AdWords, sometimes the interface can be somewhat slow. So I'm just going to refresh this page and do its thing. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, you won't be able to run ads unless you set up your billing information, etc. So here we have our test campaign for training, which is the campaign that we set. Within that campaign, there is one ad group, which is called ad group 1. So what we might do is we might change this and say this is our charcoal ad group. So this is the one that we're using to this is what we're using to advertise charcoal. And within that, we have some keywords defined. So these are our keywords. So these are all broad match at the moment. So Google is just going to use anything that looks like these keywords. So what we might want to do from an optimization point of view is we might want to change some of these to exact match, but that's sort of an optimization thing that we that I'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about optimizations. What you might want to do here is actually have two ad groups, one which has exact match as the keyword, so you only want to advertise on these terms only, and the second ad group would be an exact copy of that, but the only difference, the keywords in it are a phrase match. And the reason for that is that exact match keywords tend to have a lower cost per click, better click-through rates, and therefore improves your quality score. And then you still want to use broad match or phrase match to actually do some prospecting. So you can do that in two ways. Obviously, you can have two different ad groups, but sometimes it's actually better to actually split that into two campaigns, for the simple reason that you can then control the amount of budget that you're spending prospecting, looking for keywords, and you have an exact match campaign that's really driving the conversions and really driving the performance for you. So hopefully you can max out that campaign because it's got really good converting keywords in it, and you put more budget towards it, and you have that separate testing campaign where you've got phrase and broad match keywords, so you can actually go find new keywords that might be useful to your campaign going forward. So at the moment we've sort of got this. It's a broad match. It's a broad match set of keywords. You might let that run for 2 or 3 weeks, see what terms are driving conversions, and then from that create an exact match duplicate of it. And where you see that is under here in search terms. And obviously we don't have any search terms yet because this campaign hasn't run. So other than keywords, the other thing that we've in here is obviously ads. So we see we have one responsive ad, which is what we just created a moment ago. It's in the ad group charcoal. And then if we go and have a look at that, sorry, it's obviously under review at the moment because we just submitted it. If I go back here a second. And if we click on edit, now every time you edit an ad, it will go back into review. I mean, generally that just takes a few minutes, maybe sometimes an hour or two for the ad to be approved. So just be careful when you're, if you're in tweaking and adjusting, like be aware that every time you edit the ad, it obviously goes back into review. It'll be taken out of market for a while, and then it'll be put back in once it's updated. So this is the ad that we created a few moments. Not the greatest ad in the world, because it would need, better, bit more work in terms of better descriptions, better headlines, and then better descriptions as well. But basically, this campaign is now ready to launch, and the only thing that we would need to do is to go into billing and to set up a billing or payments profile to go along with this account, and then assuming that Google approves these ads, it would start to deliver them for us. So that's our basic campaign set up and running. Any questions before we go back to the charts? Okay, no questions. Let me go back into screen share mode here. Okay, so let's talk about metrics to monitor and measure. So when you have your campaign up and running, the overview screen in the top of your ads account basically gives you a picture like this, and you can select the metrics here on the top of this in terms of what you want to track over time, and you can set the date range. Can be a month, can be all time, can be the last 3 months, wherever time horizon you want to sort of track. So in this case, we're looking at a campaign that's got a 23% click-through rate, which is really, really healthy. It's got its average cost per click is 44 cents. It's got a conversion, 103 conversions in the period, and it's got a conversion value cost, which is your lowest, which is your return of 22.4. So that means for every euro we're spending in this campaign, we're getting 22 euros back. So this is a really nicely performing campaign. So you might want to, this is not a bad, these 4 metrics, this gives me an idea of, how well the ads are written. This gives me an idea of what the general cost is and how it's trending. So you can see there's one little bit of concern is that it's sort of the cost per click tends to be trending up if you watch that red line. So it's something we got to watch. And there's a way, one of the things when you see that happening is to check auction insights, and I'll show you that in a second. Have a look at conversions. So, okay, there's a few spikes in conversions, the yellow line, but generally speaking, it's pretty healthy. And conversion value, okay, it's probably been a little higher over here. So you're just looking at the trends here, and you can change this whether it looks at daily, weekly, or monthly. It smooths out these lines a little bit, makes the trends a little bit more, obvious. So now that you've got your campaign created and it's up and running, what should you be looking at in terms of success metrics? So there's a couple of things. If you think about it, I've always said, keywords, ad copy, landing page. They're the 3 elements of your campaign, and all 3 of them have to work well for your campaign to be successful. So in terms of keywords, obviously the number of impressions, clicks, and click-through rate, gives you the volume. So if you've selected a very small set of keywords, which is the right thing to do, because hopefully they're converting well, the only challenge with that is you're limited in terms of the number of times your ads will be shown, and therefore the number of clicks, therefore the amount of revenue you can generate. So if if you want to get more clicks and more impressions, then typically you have to look at adding more keywords to it. And the challenge with that is obviously if you add more keywords, A, they could be more expensive, B, they mightn't convert as well, but that's what you're trying to manage over time. And if you're doing that yourself, you need to spend a bit of time investigating that. If you're working with an agency or an outside partner to manage your Google ads, this is the sort of thing you would expecting them to be looking at on a month-by-month basis. Cost per click, what is that at the moment? If it's going up, are there keywords now that are more expensive that I need to remove from the campaign because they're driving more cost and not enough conversions? So we got to just track where your average cost per click runs over time. The number of conversions, that's obviously key because that's what delivers revenue to the business. So again, you might look at keywords and you can view keywords and see which keywords are driving conversions and then decide to add them or remove them or pause them if they're driving a lot of traffic and a lot of cost but not driving any conversions. So you got to review your keywords all the time when you're doing this. And then the point is that you're doing that to remove any high cost, low converting keywords that are in your campaign. And you do that by going back to that keywords piece. So let me just jump over there again just very quickly, just to show you where that. So if I go back here, go back to my campaign. So if I look at my campaign and then I go down to the left-hand side here and I see search keywords. So once my campaign starts to run, what I'm going to see in here is, so I'm going to see in here my different keywords. So I'm going to see my barbecue charcoal. And then I'm going to see in the columns, how many impressions that keyword got, how many clicks, its average CPC, its click-through rate, and the cost. So to me, what you're looking at here is what is that keyword costing me and how many conversions is it driving, or what's the return on that keyword. And you can add in the number of conversions. So we can modify the columns here and go to conversions. And if we want to see, let's do all conversions. We add all conversions into it. So now I'm going to see by keyword how many conversions that keyword is driving. So this is what I got to be reviewing on an ongoing basis. And you sort your keywords by cost. So you're seeing the keywords that you're spending the most money on. And if they're not returning at a sufficient rate, then you have the choice to pause that keyword or indeed remove it from the campaign entirely, depending on how well or how badly your campaign is actually doing. Okay, so going back to metrics to review. So that's keywords. So the next one is ad copy. So if your click-through rate is low, like below 2%, then you really need to rewrite the ad, or more correctly now, you've got to add more headlines, change the descriptions, etc. Because if you've got a click-through rate of below 2%, well then over time Google will stop showing that ad because it's not really up to scratch. So the other thing that you just need to keep an eye on is how well your ad copy is doing. And it's a little bit easier now because basically we're using less ads. They're all responsive ads, and Google's trying to use those elements to find the best click-through rate for you. And then finally, your landing page. So if you're driving traffic to your page and you're still not actually getting orders or getting leads, then the problem might be with the landing page. And it should be, at least 3%. If it's above that, well, then it's, that's pretty good. If it's significantly below that, then you probably need to really think about where you're landing the traffic. So do you need to land on a different page, or do you need to go and actually build a dedicated landing page for that campaign? And by that, I mean, if we have a general barbecue store that's selling barbecues, meat, rubs, sauces, and charcoal, and I'm running a charcoal campaign, I may not want to land the traffic on the homepage of the website because then the user has to go find charcoal. What I want to be doing is landing it on a page that says we are the best people for buying charcoal online in the country. here's our ranges, here's the reasons you should buy. So it's a very dedicated page to what that person is actually looking for, and that's what drives the best chance of success. So to recap, 3 things to keep an eye on: your keywords, your ad copy, and your landing page. These are the metrics you need to think about. Your keywords, you need to review those keywords on probably a monthly sort of basis. Look at the ones that are high cost, low converting, and pause and remove them. Have a campaign in there that's phrase match or broad match, or either dynamic search, or another type of the campaign, which is prospecting and finding new keywords for you that might work, which you can then add into an exact match campaign that should be very efficient. Second area is ad copy. Are your click-through rates okay on all of your ads? Anything that's low, go rewrite the ad, rework it. If it's not, if it's high, leave alone. It's fine. Don't edit it unnecessarily. And then finally, your landing page conversion rate at least 3%. If it's below that, then you need to think about either you're driving the wrong traffic or it's the wrong page that people are landing on. Okay, any questions before we go talk about optimization strategy? Okay, so now that you have your campaign created and up and running, the first thing is you need to go through a constant process of reviewing it, analyzing it, and adjusting it, because nothing ever stays the same, unfortunately. You can be lucky some campaigns run well for a long time, but it's not always the case. The next thing I'd say is don't go in and make change to the campaign every other day or every hour or anything like that. You know, review, consider where the campaign is going, make some changes, and then leave it alone for 7 to 10 days. And then repeat that process on a fortnightly basis, or however much time you're able to sort of put into it. And the reason for doing that is the algorithms need time to learn and adjust. So if you're making changes all of the time, the algorithm is always in learning mode, so it never optimizes, it never settles, and that, generally speaking, only hurts your results. And it's very frustrating, and it's very tempting to go tweak and change something all of the time. But really, my advice to you is to, assign a decent amount of time, half an hour, whatever. Sit down, analyze your keywords, your ad copies, everything else in terms of how it's performing. Make some adjustments and changes, but then leave it alone for 7 to 10 days and come back and repeat the process. Too many people tinker with the thing every day, and really that doesn't lead to good success. Okay. So the other thing that Google will help you with in terms of optimization, it'll give you recommendations. So it'll tell you to, create more relevant ads or add more keywords and all of that sort of good things. And it'll give you an optimization score, out of 100 for your campaign. Now, the thing about Google recommendations is you really have to look at them, and it isn't always a good idea to accept every recommendation that Google gives you. Partly, I believe, is because obviously Google's desire is to get you to do more advertising, because it genuinely believes that the more advertising you do, the better you will be, but that means you spend more budget. So you need to review and consider each of these recommendations. And very often you'll see it'll recommend you add keywords. And when you look at the keywords, when you look at those keywords, they're not relevant to your business. So you just dismiss those recommendations. So it's a good idea to review the recommendations. It'll give you good recommendations for adding extensions and things like that you might have missed in your campaign setup. By all means, follow those recommendations, apply them. But be wary, and don't blindly apply every recommendation. It's not necessarily going to improve your campaign at each step of the way. Okay. So when you're trying to optimize and improve your campaign, here's some things you need to remember. To optimize requires data you can trust. And by that, I mean it's clicks, not time. So when I say, it generally takes 3 months for you to have a good understanding of whether this campaign is going to work for you. So you need to, if you're starting out on Google Ads, you need to decide on a budget that you're prepared to spend for at least 3 months, and then work on it over the 3 months. And at the end of 3 months, you'll be in a position to make a decent decision, hopefully, whether this campaign is going to work for your business or not. Now, that's predicated, when I say 3 months, it assumes that you're spending enough money to get at least 1,000 clicks, because you probably need that amount of data before you have enough data to actually make any sort of a judgment. If you're looking at a campaign that generates 5 clicks and only generated 1 sale, you could say, hey, that's got a 20% conversion rate. But on 5 clicks and 1 sale, that's not data you can trust. If you had 500 clicks and you had 100 sales, that's much safer to base a judgment on. And obviously, the more data you have, the more reliable your decision should be. On keywords, you should split campaigns between exact and phrase match keywords. Exact match keywords will perform best. It'll give you the lowest CPC, and you're controlling your campaign most tightly. But you generally need to have a phrase match campaign as well, or some sort of campaign that's prospecting or looking for other keywords that might work for you. So we very often start with phrase match and then create a duplicate exact match campaign when we're happy that we have a bunch of exact match keywords that work and work well. And then we can manage the budget between the 2 campaigns, so that we're maximizing what we're spending on the exact match because that's well performing, and we're just continuing to put some of our budget into prospecting to find other keywords. And the other one is you got to add lots of negative keywords. So everything that's not relevant to your business, add it as a negative keyword. You should have more negative keywords to find in your account than actually keywords that you're targeting. That's something a lot of people miss. Cost per click, you got to look at bid strategies and bid adjustments. You can optimize, you can also look at your performance by device. So if you see that your desktop searches work much better than mobile searches, then you can increase your bid on desktop and get more desktop traffic, for example, which is a really good optimization technique. And you don't have to be number 1. So you need to be in the top 3 generally to get traffic and traction. And the other thing then is quality score. So quality score impacts your ad rank. So when you're looking at your keywords, see what Google is saying in terms of your quality score. If it's low, then you need to go look at your landing page, see where you can add some of those keywords into that page that makes sense. Make sure that, in this case, you're talking about your keywords, your ad copy, your landing page. Make sure your keywords are represented in your landing page. If your keywords are in the URL of your landing page, even better. So then Google will think or understands that this is highly relevant to the search that the person made, and that's what improves your quality score, improves your click-through rates. And good quality scores means lower CPCs. And then conversion rate. You got to track your conversion rate on the landing page. How is it converting? If it's not converting well, then you need to take some action in terms of, because that's a tax basically on your campaign. Very simply, if your landing page is converting at 5%, or it's converting at 2.5%, the landing page that's not converting at 2.5% is costing you twice as much in terms of ad spend as the one that's converting at 5%. And you need to understand that that's just waste, and address it accordingly. I would generally recommend to start narrow, to be selective in the campaigns and the keywords that you start with, because that stops you bleeding money. If you've got a lot of keywords and a lot of campaign, that takes a lot of effort and optimization, and it's very easy to spend money on clicks and impressions and get no conversions. So I would generally recommend, if you're starting out on this, to have a brand campaign, which is just your brand terms. There may be very little search volume, but have it there so that you're picking up any search volume that already knows you as a brand, and therefore is highly likely to convert. And then just grow it out slowly, as you find niches that work for you. It generally takes 3 months or more of discovery, and that depends on how much budget you put into it, and it depends on the cost per click, because it's not so much the time. You need to put enough budget to get enough clicks in about a 3-month period to actually make a decision. if you only spend enough that you've only enough data after 12 months, there's so many variables and things that can happen in the time. It just makes making decisions really, really difficult. I would always bid on your brand terms, have a brand campaign, although if you're in hospitality, hotels, etc., that might be just because of competition from hotels.com, booking.com, Trivago, and all these other sites. That can be a little bit difficult. But if you're outside of that, I would always have a brand campaign because it's generally going to be low cost. It means you dominate the results page, and you should have a really high click-through rate and good conversion rate in that brand campaign, which A, works for you, and B, improves your overall quality score, which makes your account actually work better entirely. So that's a really good thing to do. And also sometimes people will find you on a category campaign. They won't convert in the first visit, but they'll be introduced to your brand. They then do a brand search and come back and convert on the brand campaign. So, people say, I'm doing well on SEO. Why should I bid on my brand terms on paid search as well? It just gets you 8 times out of 10, it gets you extra traffic that you wouldn't have got before. So you should do it. If you end up just cannibalizing your SEO traffic, fine, review it, step it back, but generally speaking, that doesn't happen. I've mentioned negative keywords before. Just to say it again, you need to look at all the negatives and make sure that you've got plenty of them, and manage them via lists, so you can apply them at a campaign level, an account level, or even ad group level as well if you need to. For example, if you've got 2 campaigns where one is phrase match and one is exact match, you need to put your exact match keywords as a negative on your phrase match campaign, so your 2 campaigns aren't competing with each other, because you don't want your campaigns bidding in the auction against each other, because that only makes money for Google, not for you, for example. So that's another use of negative keywords you need to think about. Bid adjustments. So even if you're now with automated bidding, this is probably slightly less applicable, but it's still applicable. So the most common ones are device. So you can do a bid adjustment by device. So what you want to look at is how your campaigns are performing by device. And if you find that mobile performs really well versus desktop, or vice versa, desktop performs really well by mobile, then you can increase the bid on desktop versus mobile, for example. And that'll get you more clicks, if you like, and hopefully at a better overall business rate for you. The other one is location. So for example, if you're targeting Loudmead, Fingal, you can see which of those locations are driving most business for you. And again, you can still target the 3 locations, but you can tell Google, you know what, if the search is coming from County Louth, bid higher on it, because that's got a higher chance of success for me than somebody maybe bidding from Fingal, for example. So they're equal things that you can help adjust your campaigns. The other thing you can look at in that left-hand column when you have some traffic and you have the campaign running for some time is auctions insights. And you need to track this over time, because it tells you who else is bidding on the terms that you're bidding. Because sometimes it happens, your cost per click goes up and you wonder what happened. And when you go and look in the auction insights, what you find is actually there's a new competitor in there that's bidding like hell on the terms that you're bidding on. So then you got to figure out a strategy around that. How do you approach that? And there's obviously a bit of conversation around that. So it's a really interesting one, because you also see how much of the impression share that you're getting. So in this case, they were getting 41%. So that means we can get more impressions and therefore more clicks. It probably costs us more, but we've got to figure out a strategy maybe to get more of that. Or maybe we have enough impression share at 41% and we haven't reached that law of diminishing returns. So keep an eye on who's competing with you in the auctions. Really useful insight. This is just a chart. It'll be in the deck when you download it, but it just gives you some average conversion rates across AdWords for different segments. So you can see it goes all the way from less than 2% to 7%, depending on the industry segment that you're in. So that's what I'm saying. If you're not If you're not performing, you know, around about that 3% mark on search, then you're probably below average. And then on the display network, the conversion rates are very rarely above 1%. So if you're doing advertising on display, you're getting cheaper cost per clicks, but you got a lower cost, or you got a lower conversion rate. So you got to do the maths that we did earlier. Okay, that's all of the material that we're planning to go through this morning. So just before I go through a couple of housekeeping items. Okay, Jerry. Just excuse me one second. You can, excuse me, I'm just going to get a drink of water. 1 second. Sorry about that, folks. I guess you're taking your throat sometimes. So just to answer this particular question, you absolutely can end up betting against yourself using 2 campaigns. So the way to avoid that is, as I mentioned, is to put your exact match terms in as negatives on your broad match term, and that will stop that happening. Okay, couple of housekeeping items. There is a survey for the training this morning, so I'm going to put that in the chat. So if you would very kindly fill in the survey, see how you got on this morning. If there's any feedback for things that we can change and improve. There's also, okay, let me find that here. So here's the chat. So this is the link for the survey. So if you just ask if everybody would please fill in that survey. It helps us with feedback in terms of what's happening or what you found from the course, and is there anything else that we might change for future ones. Now there are some handouts. So there is the slides and handouts are available on this URL, which I'll also put in the chat so you can click on it directly. The video on this page is actually just from a previous version of the course. I will post a link to the actual version that we ran this morning, and I will send that out to you separately afterwards. And finally, just as an offer to everybody that's taken the time this morning, if you want me to have a look at your ads accounts, you can book a sort of free 30-minute sort of consultation if you like, and you can use the HubSpot link that I've just put in the meeting. And I'm more than happy to take 30 minutes just to review what you're doing and provide any guidance that might be useful for you in terms of where you're at the moment with your AdWords campaigns. So 3 things we'd ask, please. Please do fill in the survey from SurveyMonkey. The middle link is obviously the, where you get these slides and the video of the previous running of this course, and I will post the video from this morning later on. And if you do want a 30-minute sort of quick review or audit or some recommendations in terms of what you're doing at the moment, then I'm happy to do that, and you can book some time on my diary to do that using the link in the message. So with that, I'm just going to pause and look for any questions. If you want to raise your hand, if you want to talk your question rather than type it, or type it in the QA box at this point, I'm happy to spend the next few minutes and see what questions are still there that we haven't answered, and I'll certainly try my best to answer them for you. So I'm going to pause and give you a chance to add any new questions that you might have. Okay, so there's can you brief overview of budget allocation when comparing brand match keywords with phrase or exact, I guess broad match keywords with phrase or exact match keywords. Well, in terms of allocating budget, you can only do that at a campaign level. So what I would generally say is, if you've got an exact match and a phrase match, two separate campaigns, then it's a question of maximizing the budget for the campaign that's obviously driving the maximum amount of conversions for you. So your exact match campaign is typically where you're going to get your cheapest conversions, if you like. So you want to make sure that you're maximizing that. And what you can look at there is target impression share, which is a metric on that campaign. And if that impression share is low, then you can obviously increase your budget to make sure that you're appearing for more of the searches in that sort of space. So you can sort of let Google do some of the work for you in that way. And then on your phrase match campaign, now this is more prospecting, so you're going to get more clicks, more searches, but some of them may or may not be relevant. So it depends on your attitude to risk, if you like. If you're really concerned about managing the cost in your campaigns, and then you're going to keep that budget on that campaign lower. But if you're aggressively looking to find new niches, new keywords, then you're going to allocate more budget to it to allow you to learn and find other keywords quicker. But I would sort of go with using target impression share to see how much of your impression share is lost because of budget, and you'll see that in one of the columns in the campaign. If you're losing, a lot of your impression share because of budget, then you can increase the budget on your exact match campaign. That should improve the performance of it. And then, depending on how aggressive you want to be in finding new keywords, then allocate budget to your phrase match campaign. But it needs to be two campaigns if you're going to manage it via budget, which is probably the best way to do it. Okay, hopefully that answered that question. Any other questions before we close up? I'm not sure. I may have to check with the LEO team. I mean, yeah, we do more advanced classes in this space, all right. But I don't think that's on the schedule at the moment for the LEO team. But we can certainly raise it to Amy and the team and see if there's an interest in that. Okay, I think we've got the question on broad versus exact. We've got budget allocation. We've got all that. Okay. Okay, so if there's no more questions, folks, I'm going to close. I'm going to close the session there and just say thank you again for attending this morning. I would ask again, just please complete the survey. I will drop you an email after the event later on today, or maybe tomorrow, with the links to the course material and the recording of this morning's session. But in the meantime, you can access a previous view of it at the link in the chat. So thank you again, folks. I'll close the session there and hope you all found it useful and valuable today.